My Lords, post-legislative scrutiny of the Public Order Act 2023 began in May 2025. It will assess how the Act operates in practice. The Police, Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 will undergo similar post-legislative scrutiny between April 25 and April 27.
I'm grateful as always to my noble friend the Minister for that answer, but the issue is about more than one statute. Indeed, the common law and statute law in this sensitive area has mushroomed under governments of all persuasions in recent years. Given the summer we've just had, given the challenges to both freedom of expression and public order, isn't it time there was an overarching review of all the law in this area to examine not just adequacy and coherence, but public and police understanding of this sensitive area of the law?
I'm grateful to my noble friend. She will know that, as I've just said, that legislation is kept under review at all times. We have indeed some legislation coming up in the Crime and Policing Bill before this House very shortly that will add other measures to the policing of protests. But I say to her most definitely that the policing of protests is a matter for the police, but the freedom to protest and the freedom of expression is one which is extremely important. She raises a sensible suggestion to look at how we can ensure that the police and the public understand where those barriers are. But I hope that we can reflect on what's happened at any protest and ensure that the right to protest is central, but the right to do so in a peaceful, orderly way is also central. And those are two basic tenets that any review she suggests would still be self-evident and central to that review.
My Lord, I suggest that sections 12 and 13 of the Terrorism Act 2000 needs amendment. May I say that to hold a placard and to sit in a square is not an obvious act of terrorism. To arrest and prosecute such people is an infringement of the right of free speech and dissent. What does need to be caught is acts of further and positive acts of terrorism, that is to say, acts which further that crime.
If the Noble Viscount is referring to the actions relating to Palestine Action recently, which I believe he is, he will know and remember that the House of Commons voted 385 to 26 only on the 23rd of June, and this House voted 144 to 16 only on the 3rd of July to put in place measures to prescribe Palestine Action. And one of the reasons for prescription was to ensure that people cannot support that organisation for reasons that have been given to us on advice about the levels of terrorist activity. Now, holding a plaque in Parliament Square saying, "I support Palestine Action," the police are currently enforcing that legislation. I think it's important that we look at, in a couple of months' time, how the legislation has progressed. And by that I mean there will be published statistics on the number of arrests, the number of charges and the number of convictions. And I suggest this House both awaits that information but also remembers the reasons why at this dispatch box and in the House of Commons ministers stood up and asked for that prescription order, overwhelmingly supported by both houses.
I have listened to the Minister and the reviews he intends to have on the various legislation, but there really is serious concern in the country about the erosion of the right to free speech. And that's demonstrated by the hundreds of people who have turned out simply to express their opinions about the situation, such as the situation in Palestine. They don't want to commit acts of violence. They do believe that our country has always cherished its right to free speech. So although Her Majesty's Government intends to have reviews, I would say to the noble Lord that because this issue is bringing the law into such disrepute, because it's using so much police time in processing hundreds of people who are arrested in situations, as the noble Lord says, which are questionable, what can they actually do short of 2 years to ensure that our democratic right to free speech is protected?
I hope I can assure the noble Baroness that the right to free speech, the right to protest, the right to make a view known about Palestine or indeed about Israel, or indeed about any other issue before the House, is central to the democratic rights that we all have as citizens. But this House has made a decision with the other House to prescribe Palestine action. That doesn't mean that people can't protest about the issue of Palestine, support Israel or condemn it. Doesn't mean any of that. What it means is that Palestine Action has been deemed, on advice to ministers, as an organisation that goes beyond issues of protest and has gone beyond issues of criminal damage to organise activities which are potentially in the sphere of terrorist activity. So I say to the noble Baroness, protest about Palestine, protest about Israel, protest any way you like, wave a flag, put a plaque up, but supporting Palestine Action under the terms of the Proscription order in this House and in the House of Commons, overwhelmingly passed, deserves to have action taken, and that's why the police are upholding that legislation currently.
Recent report by Policy Exchange has highlighted the chaotic nature of the application of the law regarding unfair and disproportionate disruption caused by protesters as a result of the Ziegler ruling by the Supreme Court. What steps is His Majesty's Government, taking to reform the law of public protest so that prosecutors do not need to prove that a conviction would not be disproportionate interference in convention rights and so reconcile the problems caused by the Ziegler ruling?
If the noble Lord will allow me, he's raised an extremely important point. I don't want to answer that point directly at the dispatch box now. I need to reflect upon the issues that he's raised. I hope he'll understand that, and I will get back to him in writing on that issue so that there is clarity on that ruling.
I think the Minister is missing the point.
Here from the Liberal Democrat bench is next.
Well, Lord, I just will respond quickly to the Minister to point out that the large majorities he's so proud of were achieved by bundling together Palestine Action with two obvious and very extreme terrorist organisations. My Lords, in Israel, many citizens are lawfully protesting against the slaughter and starvation of the people of Gaza. By contrast, here, right outside this building, 522 peaceful protesters, also about Gaza, were arrested under terrorism legislation. This spectacular own goal against our right to protest was the entirely predictable consequence of the government's prescription of Palestine Action as terrorists. That was enabled by our far too broad definition of terrorism, which includes the damage to property that most people do not consider to be terrorism. So my question to the Minister is, when will the government review and correct this overreach in the Terrorism Act 2000?
Well, the noble Lord will remember that although the three organisations were put together, that Palestine Action has committed 3 attacks that met the threshold set out in the very act that he's just mentioned of 2000. And that was at Thales in Glasgow in 2022, at Instro Precision in Kent, and Elbit Systems in Bristol. Not to mention, which I can't for ongoing legal proceedings in detail, the situation at the airbase recently. Also, Palestine Action are encouraging terrorist action, are working online to encourage terrorist action, and there is a definitive difference between supporting a Palestinian state, which, as it happens, I happen to do, supporting issues about the situation in Gaza, which raises real concerns for the government and beyond, supporting issues about criticism of Israel, which many members of this House have made. That is all reasonable. What is not reasonable is to support, under the orders of this Act, the measures the Palestine Action have and are taking.
If it was illegal to noisily call Israel's actions a genocide, then I would suggest that many members of this House and the other place would be currently serving time. It is not, as the noble Lord the Minister has said. He knows that I have supported the prescription of Palestine Action. But will he meet me to discuss my recommendation in the recent review, which he is considering, that actually much of this controversy could have been lessened if if the government, if the police had had a mechanism to restrict the activities of this organisation, which were willfully breaking the law and boasting about doing so before they reached the terrorist threshold?
Of course, I'll happily meet with the Noble Lord to discuss his report and recommendations. And I'll also say to him that what Palestine Action are doing now has reached a threshold. There were actions before which were criminal actions, which may well and could have and are resulting in prosecutions, which may or may not result in convictions downstream. But the assessment that we've had to make, based on evidence that we've been given, is that Palestine Action has crossed that threshold. He makes a valuable point about how we examine the developments of that, of organisations. But the key issue for this House is there's a threshold in the 2000 Act, which the Noble Lord has mentioned. The assessment is neutrally that Palestine Action have crossed that threshold, and therefore, as government, we have to take cognizance of that. Because if we didn't take cognizance of that, and actions were taken by Palestine Action that caused significant damage or significant harm to individuals and or property, which is very possible, then we would be culpable to have had that allowed to be happening. So I will certainly meet with the Noble Lord and reflect on the points he's made in due course.